Now, we welcome your feedback. There will be a QR code that's going to be posted or it's available at the front desk. Oh, it's up there. To send us your comments and feedback. Hopefully constructive. So, yeah.
Your English is crystal clear. And
I've been practicing.
It's not crystal clear.
Well, send the comments. I have more things to do right now, but please send those comments to this site.
Animation notes are perfect.
Okay, I'm very appreciative. I'll ignore you later. No, I'm kidding. Okay, now can I go to the feature presentation here? By the way, Luke Youngin, you may have recognized Hubert, the father, and Rita as the mother and father, which I consider to be the mother and father of this whole project, because they published the first international edition of Jonathan Noble in the Netherlands. Okay. Good. Now, my talk today is about that peculiar institution, migration control. Now, why do I call it a peculiar institution? Because I'm referring to what Americans used to refer to slavery in antebellum South about 200 years ago in the United States. They called it the peculiar institution as a euphemism for slavery because they didn't want to actually admit that, wow, they still had slaves and depended on them for plantations to provide free labor, where everything that they produced was 100% taxed from them. And it was a horrible institution that existed throughout history and throughout the world. And most people came to accept it. I mean, all the founding fathers accepted it. It was a normal thing, even built into the Constitution of the United States. But there were people who challenged it. The abolitionists, the people such as William Lloyd Garrison, Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, William Wilberforce, and many others who challenged the status quo from ancient times to that time, and saying, no, this isn't right, that people should be held as slaves on plantations. And they finally brought about a big change. And I noticed that just recently, there was an article actually just last month by Jeff Thomas in Doug Casey's newsletter called International Man, where he talks about people are fleeing tax slavery. They said taxation is unquestionably, by definition, partial enslavement. In our own time, governments have recognized that partial slavery is more effective. Give people the impression that they're free whilst taking a major portion of the fruits of their labor from them in the forms of taxation and inflation. Whenever I think of inflation, now that we're here, right here in Madrid, I think of my favorite, one of my favorite scholars about inflation, and that's Juan de Mariana, and his the one who carries on his tradition today is Jesus Huerta de Soto, who refused to accept taxation in the form of inflation, debasement of the currency. He said it even called for tyrannicide because it's a form of stealing and robbery from the general population without their consent. So I hold these people in high esteem. Doug Casey, I debated last year in Freedom Fest in the United States, in South Dakota, where he was saying, well, we shouldn't allow immigrants into the country because they're just here for the welfare. And I noticed that here, now he's arguing about that Americans should have the freedom to leave because of the high taxation in the United States. Well, people around the world are always fleeing some kind of heavy burden of taxation and persecution, or seeking out opportunity, and I consider that they're right. He was saying that, well, you can't have people coming in as long as we have a welfare state, but that's saying that because the government interferes in our life in this manner, it serves as an excuse to let them control our lives in other manners. Now, this whole idea of passports and visas and controls of migration only started about 100 years ago, in the 1920s, with the various immigration control acts that were imitated throughout the world. I'm going to show the economic freedom of the world chart that Dan Mitchell, is Dan Mitchell here today? Okay, he used the same chart in talking about taxation, and I'm going to use it here The Fraser Institute of Canada ranks all the countries in the world on this Economic Freedom of the World Index. And they use these 5 criteria: government spending, legal and secure property rights, sound money, free trade, and degrees of regulation as measures of governmental control over people's lives. Ranking up at the top are always Hong Kong, well until now, Hong Kong, Singapore, and New Zealand, and down at the bottom, Zimbabwe, Myanmar, Venezuela, and North Korea would be on there at the bottom if they even had data on North Korea. The nice thing about this is that it shows that countries that have the greatest amount of economic freedom also have the greatest amount of wealth, greatest growth, and many other benefits from health, education, civil liberties, and environmental preservation, and so on. So all of these things rank on this. Now, where are people moving? People in the United States, as Doug Casey champions, about 10 million Americans living abroad. And a lot of them, he says, are living abroad because it's lower taxes in other places. They're not always going to places that are higher on the Economic Freedom of the World Index. Sometimes they find various reasons to be for lower costs or lower taxes and so on in other countries of the world. So the top 10 countries that Americans go to are those, all around on the Economic Freedom of the World Index. What about those people coming? Oh, and by the way, Ilya Stolman, in his book Free to Move, talks about how people throughout history have always been seeking to improve their life and their condition by voting with their feet. They simply go from areas of low tyranny to areas of higher tyranny. Although not necessarily for all the Americans. But 10 million Americans abroad, they have a pretty easy time. A lot of other people come from other places in the world. This is the top 10 countries in the world that people have come from in order to come to the United States. About 51 million immigrants living in the United States. Cuba is not on the index, but it's probably on the bottom of the chart too, because there's just not enough data to include that in their ranking. How about refugees, people who are desperate, people who are fleeing persecution, crime, or various desperate conditions around the world? They come from these countries, and most of those countries aren't on the Economic Freedom of the World Index because there's just so little information. But they are coming from very desperate countries, moving with their feet from areas of desperate poverty to areas of relative freedom and prosperity. We have been very, very fortunate to have Joy Kim and Mr. Park as speakers here at this conference, and at our previous conferences we've had Yomi Park and Shinra Yuk also speak to us about the horrors of the tyranny of absolute slavery in those countries. Of North Korea, and they've had a torturous time of leaving. But for everyone who escaped, I'm guessing that there are 100 more who didn't make it. Either they died in the river crossing, or they were repatriated after, returned by the Chinese government that sent them back because the Chinese government doesn't allow them to escape from a country that is so oppressive. Which brings my one point about this. It doesn't matter on which side of the border the guard stands, whether it's on the inside of the border to keep someone in, or on the outside of the border to keep somebody from coming in or moving outside. The effect is the same. The effect is the same whether it's a North Korean border guard that's keeping them in, or a Chinese border guard that's keeping them out, or an American border guard that doesn't allow them to escape, as happened tragically in World War II, where millions of Jews and Poles and Catholics and others from Eastern Germany were fleeing Hitler, Mussolini, and Stalin, and they weren't allowed to escape to the United States. So I hold the United States immigration laws partly responsible for the whole horrors of that time. The United States does accept a lot of immigrants compared to other countries, but as a proportion of the population, it's pretty low compared to some of the others. Singapore, Australia, Switzerland, and New Zealand accept a much larger foreign-born population than the United States does. But my research indicates that countries that have a high percentage of foreign-born population also grow much more rapidly. They have much more wealth and prosperity because the immigrants bring a tremendous talent with them, bring a tremendous productivity, diligence, and eagerness to create new things out of life. I would say that that's one reason why America in its earliest years prospered so well, because the people who were fleeing Europe to come to the United States were often some of the most diligent and enterprising people. Unfortunately, as the borders closed from the 1920s on, with passports and visa controls, there built up more and more pressure from people in oppressed areas. And now we find that the number of people internationally who are displaced persons worldwide are over 94 million, or around 100 million and rising. Whereas the US government, the left-hand chart here shows that with this gray area, the number of people being admitted into the United States is paltry, a few thousand, and in decline. You know, both Trump and Biden have been horrendous in their cutting off of the escape avenue for refugees. And prohibition doesn't solve problems. As we know, with the drug wars and all the kinds of things, prohibition simply drives them underground. And so a lot of refugees are desperate to go to the illegal market, the freelance travel agents that exploit them, and very, very much, but in a desperate need. This chart shows, interestingly, where people move around the world. One of the biggest places that people have moved around the world is in China. Not from China to other countries, but within China. Because there are certain regions of China that are the freest economic freedom on the eastern seaboard, where they tried to imitate what Hong Kong was doing to build economic prosperity. And some of the most desperately repressed and controlled regions in China that are very, very slow growing. And actually the engines of growth have been in prosperous freer zones. A lot of movement around Europe as well. But it's estimated that as much as 20 to 30% of the GDP growth in China over that 20-year period of time, astounding growth in China, so much of it is attributable to the movement of 260 million people, domestic migrants, from the poor regions to the economic free regions in the eastern coast. Now compare that to the 13 million internal migrants in the European Union during this period of time, and 232 million international migrants that there is estimated to be. It's an enormous number of people, and it led to big changes. China ranks pretty low overall on the Economic Freedom of the World Index, but it's a big country. Every province has more people than most countries in the world. And there are some provinces of China that are as free as Hong Kong in terms of economic freedom. We're not talking about political freedom. And there's other provinces in China that are among the most repressed and controlled in the world. And so people moving from those repressed regions to the freer regions have led to this tremendous growth. And so I add a sixth criteria to the Economic Freedom of the World Index. It should also include migration, the opportunity, the openness to migration that allows tremendous opportunities for productivity in the countries. And look what it's done from Hong Kong for over 70 years, from a fishing village of 2 million people to now 7 million people. They accepted people from all around in Southeast Asia and gave them a place, just a city on the side of the China mainland that is more prosperous than the United States per capita today. And in Shenzhen, a mere fishing village, that just simply by opening up and trying to imitate Hong Kong, now it's made a prosperous city that's comparable in many ways. They do that in the United States. It's a big, big country, and people are constantly moving from high tax areas to low tax areas. Most number of people are leaving New York and California, high tax areas, and moving to Florida and Texas, low taxed areas. The businesses are moving from New York to Florida as well. That's because the taxes discourage them. I find that when immigrants come into the country in the United States, overwhelmingly, they don't go to the states that offer the most welfare. They go to the states that offer the least amount of welfare because the taxes are lower and they have many more opportunities for jobs and employment. That's what they're seeking when they're allowed to work. By the way, it's Dan Mitchell that has on his website lots of explanations about why people are moving from California to Florida. The Economist magazine said study after study finds a positive association between immigration and long-run economic growth, therefore ultimately the living standards of all Americans. Adrian Furman says, well, why do foreigners make better entrepreneurs? The sort of people who migrate have a different pattern of motivation, abilities, and adjustment. They are hungrier, more risk-taking, more hardy, and they are twice as likely to start start new businesses as entrepreneurs in the United States as Native American population. And they founded many of the biggest companies that are known around the world. And rather than viewing all immigrants as people not worthy of coming in, we should see them as great opportunities, producers of tremendous opportunity for us. I say that courage welcomes newcomers. Fear rejects them. Courage welcomes competition. Fear shuts out competition. Courage champions liberty. Fear rejects liberty. How do these people come? Do they just sit around on the welfare rolls? No. Time after time, the demonstration is that second-generation populations from these people, from these various countries of the world, earn more than the Native American population in the United States. They're highly productive and highly entrepreneurial. And migration is a great seer that selects out the best of people, I think. But the United States is horrible in rejecting them, as is many countries around the world. Why legal immigration is nearly impossible, says this study by David Muir from the Cato analysis that just came out last month. They look at all the people that have expressed an interest in coming to the United States, and a tiny fraction of people who are allowed through the gate, because the gate is very small, with very few bureaucrats even checking the papers. And the idea is everything we can do to keep them out, especially if they're from countries that are suspect. We welcome people more generously from Ukraine, but not from south of the border, or from Africa, or from Asia. That's been so typical of American history. To markets, people are an opportunity. You know, when you go into Walmart and they have a lot of customers, they open up new cash registers. They put on more people, service them as quickly as possible, bring them in. They are opportunities for us. But to government, people are a problem. You know that by every line you have to stand in a government office or bureau. Just to get a renewal of my passport, you know, it took, to get a renewal of my passport, it took me 13 weeks to get a renewal of my passport. And then it even required a congressional intervention to get them to move me up in the queue. But, you know, to get a ticket to fly here, I went online, I was able to get it instantly. You can do that through the stock market, through the retail market, through the airline market. You get treated quickly as a customer when you're treated by the marketplace, when they see people very differently than government. And what would someone like Donald Trump do with $20 billion? Well, he'd build a wall. Well, it'd be an ineffective wall, because people always find ways to get around these walls, but it takes an enormous cost and burden. You know, for a family that earns maybe a couple $1,000s a year in Honduras, they pay $6,000 for coyotes over there to help them get through the desert, since they don't die as they do by the thousands. But a much better solution would be to build a big gate that's very effective and efficient, as the marketplace could do. Just to give you an example, for a family of U.S. citizens coming in, these are family members in Mexico, who are family of citizens in the United States, how long does it take to wait in line? For an F2B visa for an unmarried adult child, it takes 76 years in queue. So the sponsors are 100% of them, sponsors who sponsored the visa in the first place, are dead before they even come. So of course people aren't going to waste their whole lives waiting in line. All of us know what it's like to break the law in order to save time, because we all do it on the highways all the time. I'm guessing that almost everybody in here has gone over the speed limit, which is also a misdemeanor. A misdemeanor to go into the United States illegally, a misdemeanor to go over the speed limit, and yet we all do, to save a few minutes. Imagine if it was our lives at stake. Everybody would excuse them. Oh, you're going fast to get to the hospital, your life is at stake. Of course everybody excuses that. But they get very irate when they say, oh, this person jumped the queue to save their lives or their families or something in a couple of years of time, and not going through the proper process. The proper process is a horrendous process that destroys lives in the way. So I would say that that we all do this to save time, and those people are looking at time in the form of years, not just minutes, of getting to our appointment faster. So much of the world's attention focused on those 5 wealthy people who decided to get in that submersible and go down to visit the Titanic. You know, the newspapers were filled with it. The governments of the world spent millions of dollars investigating the situation and searching for them and trying to rescue them and so on. At this very same time, people were dying by the hundreds and thousands in the Mediterranean Sea or in the Arizona deserts because the governments weren't trying to rescue them. They were trying to arrest them and return them, send them back into horrendous conditions. As Elizabeth Shackelford says, it's hard not to see the gross disparity in response to 5 privileged men missing at sea, compared to the treatment of thousands of the least privileged on Earth. Now, is there enough space for people? Well, you know, 100 years ago, we had half as many people in the United States, and they thought, oh, there's no room for more immigrants. And yet now, we seem to be quite comfortable with it. And it turns out that most of the people throughout history and throughout the world like to go to crowded spaces. They move to the cities. That's where the action is, where the opportunities are, where the other people are. There's a lot going on in cities, and so therefore in the United States, of all the U.S. land area, only 3% is the cities and suburbs. I mean, you could fly for hours over the United States and see pretty much open spaces. It's not that there's a lack of space. There's a lack of willingness to embrace them. And look what happened to Las Vegas when they just simply took this desert out in Nevada and they said, we're going to allow one thing here. We'll allow you to gamble. And after just changing that one law, people moved to Las Vegas and made it one of the most prosperous and thriving cities in America just by allowing some freedom in a desert. Well, imagine what desperate refugees could do anywhere else around the country. Hundreds of Hong Kongs could spring up all over the place. And at this time, the fertility rates of almost all the developed countries of the world, the industrial countries of the world, the OECD countries, all of them have fertility rates that are below the replacement rate. That means they're declining in population. Well, an easy solution to that is allow more people to come in and take care of the elderly people too. As in Japan, they might benefit enormously. That is one of the countries that's experiencing the greatest decline in population and productivity as a result. Are we worried about crime? Yeah, those immigrants might bring crime with them. I ask us to reconsider the definition of crime. If it's stealing, killing, and lying, I would say that those halls of Congress and the halls of the United Nations Assembly host many more crime and criminals than any of the gatherings of immigrants, because they are doing the greatest amount of killing, stealing, and robbing. But even when you look at the general population rates, the Cato Institute ran an interesting study that shows that the undocumented immigrants and the legal immigrants are both more likely to, or less likely to commit crimes than the Native Americans. So we can't use that excuse that all of this welfare that we give to tyrants all around the world who terrorize their own populations, driving their own people away. We can't use the excuse that the immigrants who are coming desperately fleeing their conditions are going to be a criminal hazard to the United States or any other country. All the people here who were immigrants in one way or another, if they were allowed to be immigrants, brought great prosperity. But had they been blocked, as the refugees from Europe after during World War II, if they had been blocked, they would all have been dead instead of contributing to the life and vitality of society around them. Even the Declaration of Independence in the United States was founded on one of the principles of the Declaration of Independence was to reject King George III because he was trying to restrict migration into the country. By the way, this went down to my lower right is my wife. She was in my I think she's better off having come. You know, there are criminals, but we hold them personally accountable. We don't hold a whole part or region of the world collectively accountable for the actions and misbehavior of some. For example, we don't say that this Timothy McVeigh, who was a terrorist who bombed the Murrah Federal Building, the biggest terrorist act by a single person in the United States, killing hundreds of people. He was a terrorist, and he deserved what he got. But do we hold everybody in the city of New York responsible for that because he came from New York? I mean, the state of New York? We don't say everybody in New York is now guilty and suspect to criminal behavior, and then we're going to throw a wall around them and require visas and passports. No. We hold him personally accountable, not a collective mentality where everybody of a particular region or race is responsible for the behavior and misbehaviors of others. I noticed that the United States government used the justification of 9/11 for the justification of the Afghan War and the Iraq War, two former allies that the United States had supported. And 15 of the 19 attackers were students, had student visas from Saudi Arabia. The United States didn't go after Saudi Arabia. And interestingly, to demonstrate the incompetence of the U.S. government, two of those hijackers, after the 9/11 incident, still received their visa renewal 6 months after the attack. For opportunity, prosperity, to escape famine, tyranny, persecution, I think the answer is pretty easy. For Ilya Soman, it's let people decide with their feet where they are best off in life. That's their human right. As the Declaration of Independence says, all men are created equal, and they are endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. For Christians, I think the answer should be real easy. What would Jesus do? I think he would be quite accepting of refugees. The Christian religion, actually, the Muslim religion and the Jewish religion all have stories of how Abraham and Jacob and Joseph, they all had to flee famine to go to Egypt. Without that ability to flee, they'd be dead. As it was for Mary and Jesus in the Christian religion to be able to flee persecution when it faced them. And for libertarians, the non-aggression principle should make it real easy. If I don't have the right to initiate violence against you to prevent you from hiring this person from wherever they are, then I don't have the right to ask the government to do it on my behalf. If it's wrong for me to do, it's also wrong for me to ask the government to do it for them. So I hold this alternative to the current status quo of state-sponsored slavery, allow people to escape. Now there are excluders, such as Hans Hermann Hoppe. And even Milton Friedman argued that you can't allow them to come as long as there's a welfare state, which is like saying, well, don't hold your breath. And I say, okay, if you're an excluder, then you don't have to include anybody in your private property and with your own money if you don't want to. But if you're an inviter, the excluder doesn't have any right to intervene with your right anymore to hire someone of the labor that you wish, any more than they have a right to intervene with what products you buy from around the world, what else you do with your life. And in other words, I'm pro-life, in favor of the life of refugees, and pro-choice, the right of people to choose whom to hire, who they're going to hire. And the governments of the world could do a lot to reduce the pressure of immigration by ending the trade barriers that allows them to earn more money in other countries by selling sugar to the United States instead of prohibiting them from selling sugar. Ending the welfare to the tyrants that rule them and tyrannize them. Ending the corporate subsidies that don't unload a vast quantity of product that ruin their products, their markets. End the people quotas, labor restrictions that prevent newcomers from getting jobs because they're very eager for them, and the drug wars that often fuel the corruption and criminality in many of the countries around the world. Think of the sports. Lionel Messi just announced he's going to Florida. Everybody cheered. Nobody said, oh, can't allow him to come in. He would compete with other American football players. This guy here, Nikolai, he's one of the many who have been considered the most valuable players in the basketball season. Everybody says, oh, welcome them. We want the best for our team. Well, I say it's not just for the athletes, it's for everybody to be able to hire the best at their children, and that competition serves to inspire everybody else in the country to get better or move away if they would. Migration controls, to me, it's an abolitionist cause. State plantation has been, plantation slavery has been replaced by state slavery. And I would say we have to be champions of a change in mentality. We view immigrants and people from other countries as existed long, long before this recent 100 years. So, okay. So, I'd say that opening to migration, allowing people to move from tyrannical areas to freer areas is practical, brings us productivity, it's humanitarian, brings prosperity to all, and based on an ethical basis of freedom. So, thank you very much.